The unexpected caretaker. The desperate search. Zephyra Valdris pressed her palm against the cool stone wall of her mountain dwelling, watching the bioluminescent markings along her arms pulse with agitation. The geometric patterns that traced her violet skin flickered between deep blue and anxious amber, betraying her inner turmoil to anyone familiar with Nexary biology. Through the crystalline windows of her home, 3 moons cast their ethereal light across the floating gardens of Kepler 442b, but she barely noticed the beauty that usually calmed her warrior's heart. The communication crystal on her table hummed insistently, projecting urgent messages from the Galactic Peace Assembly. As the youngest commander ever appointed to the Nexary High Guard, her presence at the upcoming negotiations between the hegemony and the rebel sectors wasn't just requested, it was demanded. The fate of 17 star systems hung in the balance, and her expertise in interspecies warfare made her attendance crucial. But there was a problem. A massive, crystalline, telepathically gifted problem currently resting in the chamber below. The Sacred Guardian. A deep harmonic resonance vibrated through the floor, and Zephyra felt the familiar mental touch of Kronax brushing against her consciousness. The ancient guardian had sensed her distress, as he always did. She descended the spiral staircase carved into the living rock, her bare feet silent against the smooth stone. The sight of Kronax never failed to take her breath away. The creature stood nearly 8 feet tall at the shoulder, his body a living sculpture of translucent crystal formations that caught and refracted light in impossible ways. Veins of pure energy coursed through his crystalline structure, pulsing in rhythm with his alien heartbeat. His head, crowned with horn-like crystal spires, turned toward her as she entered, and his eyes, twin galaxies of swirling stardust, regarded her with ancient wisdom. "I know, old friend," Zephyra whispered, approaching carefully. Even after 3 years together, she maintained the proper respect. Kronax was no mere pet or companion. He was a sacred guardian, one of only 12 remaining in the known galaxy, and their bond was both blessing and responsibility that stretched back to the earliest days of Nexary civilization. The creature's mental voice resonated in her mind, wordless but filled with concern and loyalty. Through their connection, she felt his awareness of her conflict, his willingness to remain alone despite the danger it posed to his crystalline physiology. The impossible task. "The council meeting will last 5 rotations minimum," Zephyra explained aloud, though Kronax could read her thoughts. She preferred speaking when discussing serious matters, it felt more honest somehow. "Your crystal matrix needs constant monitoring. If the energy levels drop too low..." She didn't finish the sentence. They both knew what happened when a guardian's crystal structure destabilized. The implosion would devastate everything within a 3-kilometer radius. Zephyra had spent the last 2 days contacting every qualified xenobiologist, every Nexary priest, and every warrior she trusted. The responses had been uniformly terrifying. Kronax's reputation as a battle guardian preceded him. During the siege of Vorthan Prime, he had single-handedly held off an entire regiment of hegemony shock troops. The locals still spoke in whispers of the crystalline beast who could level buildings with focused sonic attacks and whose telepathic abilities could drive enemy soldiers mad with terror. "Commander Valdris, I must respectfully decline," had been the most polite refusal. The others ranged from outright panic to suggestions that she sedate Kronax for the duration, an option that would likely kill him. The unexpected volunteer. As if summoned by her desperation, the security chime echoed through her home. Zephyra frowned, checking her tactical display. No scheduled visitors, and certainly no one who should be able to navigate the treacherous mountain passes to her isolated retreat. The holographic display showed a human male standing casually at her entrance, seemingly unbothered by the thin atmosphere or the razor-sharp winds that howled through the peaks. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of confident posture that spoke of military training. His dark hair was cropped short in a practical style, and despite the harsh environment, he looked completely at ease. Humans were still relatively new to this sector of space. Their species had only achieved faster-than-light travel 30 years ago, and most Nexary still viewed them as curious primitives, brave but technologically inferior. This one, however, carried himself with an authority that commanded attention. Identification? Zephyra called through the communication system. Captain Marcus Steele, formerly of Earth Defense Corps, currently working private contracts in xenobiological security, the human replied, his voice steady and professional. I heard through certain channels that you need someone to watch over something particularly dangerous. Zephyra's bioluminescent markings shifted to deep purple, surprise mixed with skepticism. How did you even find this location? It's not on any public navigation systems. The human smile was visible even through the security feed. I have my sources. And before you ask, yes, I know what a Nexary Guardian is, and yes, I know what I'm volunteering for. The impossible meeting. Against every instinct screaming warnings in her head, Zephyra found herself opening the reinforced door. The human stepped inside, and she immediately noticed several things that didn't fit the typical primitive species profile. His equipment was subtle but advanced, a personal atmospheric processor, high-end tactical gear, and what looked like a modified neural interface behind his left ear. Captain Steele, she began, but her words died as Kronax emerged from the lower chamber. The Guardian's crystalline form caught the light streaming through the windows, creating a cascade of rainbow patterns across the walls. His mental presence filled the room like a physical force, and Zephyra felt the familiar edge of territorial aggression radiating from her bonded companion. Most beings fled at this point. Some fainted. A few had required medical attention. Captain Steele did something unprecedented. He stopped moving, lowered his gaze respectfully, and slowly knelt on one knee. Then he did something that made Zephyra's heart skip a beat. He hummed. Not a random tune, but a specific harmonic frequency that resonated perfectly with Kronax's natural energy patterns. The effect was immediate and stunning. Kronax's aggressive posture relaxed, his crystal formations brightening with curiosity rather than threat. The ancient guardian approached the kneeling human, and Zephyra watched in amazement as her bonded companion, who had threatened to eviscerate trained Nexary priests, gently touched his crystalline snout to the human's forehead. The moment of contact sent a shockwave of telepathic energy through the room. Zephyra staggered as she felt Kronax's surprise and wonder through their bond. Whatever the Guardian had sensed in the human's mind had not only impressed him, it had earned his respect. That's not possible, Zephyra whispered. He doesn't trust anyone but me. Our bond was forged in the sacred ceremonies of Mount Thyros, during the Festival of Crystal Light, 3 standard years ago, Captain Steele finished, still kneeling before Kronax. You were 23, youngest commander in Nexary history, and you bonded with the last unclaimed guardian through the ritual of shared souls. Zephyra's combat reflexes kicked in, her hand moving instinctively toward her plasma blade. How could you possibly know that? Those ceremonies are sacred, closed to all but those who carry the spark, Steele said quietly, finally raising his eyes to meet hers. Your guardian just confirmed what I suspected. I'm not here by accident, Commander Valdris. And I think we both know that Kronax needs more than just a caretaker. He needs someone who understands what he really is. As if to emphasize the point, Kronax released a harmonic pulse that filled the chamber with music, the same frequency patterns used in the most sacred Nexary ceremonies. But somehow, impossibly, the human had known to respond in kind. Zephyra realized that accepting this stranger's help might solve her immediate problem, but it would also open questions that could challenge everything she believed about the bond between guardian and master. Questions that might change not just her understanding of her own people's most sacred traditions, but the very nature of consciousness itself. Forbidden cleansing. The departure. 3 hours before dawn, Zephyra stood in her transport bay, watching Captain Steele examine Kronax with the focused attention of a true professional. The human had spent the previous evening asking detailed questions about the Guardian's care requirements, energy cycles, and behavioral patterns. His knowledge was unsettling, not just because of its depth, but because of how naturally he seemed to understand concepts that took most xenobiologists years to grasp. His crystal matrix shows microfractures along the tertiary energy channels, Steele observed, running a scanning device over Cronax's flank. The Guardian remained perfectly still, actually seeming to enjoy the attention. "When did you last perform a full purification cycle?" Zephyr's markings flickered with embarrassment. "It's been difficult to arrange. The purification of sacred light requires specific lunar alignments and a consecrated chamber. The nearest temple is on Nexari Prime, and with the war, the travel would stress his system further," Steele nodded understandingly. "And the ceremonial requirements would take weeks to arrange properly." The fact that a human understood the complexities of Nexari Guardian care better than most of her own people continued to unnerve Zephyra. She activated her personal transport, a sleek vessel designed for diplomatic missions, and turned back to address both her guardian and his temporary caretaker. 5 days, she said firmly. "The negotiations cannot last longer than that, or I'll return regardless of the political consequences." Cronax approached her, lowering his great crystalline head so she could place her palm against his forehead. The familiar warmth of their mental connection flowed between them, carrying reassurance, loyalty, and something else, curiosity about the strange human who spoke in harmonics and knew ancient secrets. "Be safe, old friend," she whispered, then looked directly at Captain Steele. "If anything happens to him." "Nothing will happen," Steele interrupted gently. "You have my word as a soldier and my honor as someone who understands what he represents." The discovery. Alone with Cronax, Marcus Steele allowed himself to truly examine the magnificent creature without the watchful eyes of his bonded partner. The Guardian's condition was worse than he'd initially assessed. The microfractures in the crystal matrix were spreading, and the energy flow patterns showed dangerous irregularities. "You've been hiding this from her, haven't you?" Steele asked aloud, knowing Cronax could understand him even without telepathic contact. "You don't want her to worry during the negotiations." The Guardian's response came as a wash of complex emotions: protectiveness, pride, and yes, concern for his bonded companion's emotional state. Cronax had been masking his deteriorating condition to avoid distracting Zephyra from her crucial mission. Steele nodded grimly. "That's what I thought. You're dying, aren't you? The crystal decay is accelerating." Over the next 2 days, Steele monitored Cronax's condition while researching everything he could access about Nexari Guardian physiology. The picture that emerged was dire. Without proper purification, the Guardian's crystalline structure would collapse within weeks, possibly days. The standard purification ceremonies required resources and time they didn't have. But Steele had learned more than xenobiology during his years of private contracts. Some knowledge came from official channels, some from ancient texts, and some from sources that most humans weren't supposed to know existed. The Forbidden Ritual. On the 3rd day, as Cronax's energy levels dropped to critical thresholds, Steele made a decision that would change everything. In the deepest chamber of Zephyra's home, surrounded by the natural crystal formations that had drawn the Nexari to build here, he began preparations for a ritual that hadn't been performed by a non-Nexari in over 1,000 years. The cleansing of inner light was older than the formal purification ceremonies, dating back to the earliest days when Guardians first bonded with the Nexari. It was dangerous, requiring the ritualist to directly interface with the Guardian's energy matrix, but it could be performed without temples or lunar alignments. Steele had found references to the ritual in classified xenoarchaeological reports, fragments of text that most researchers dismissed as mythology. But certain private military contractors had access to information that civilian scientists never saw, and Steele had learned to recognize truth buried in legend. "This is going to hurt both of us," he warned Cronax as he activated ancient ceremonial patterns carved into the chamber floor. "But it's the only way to save your life." The ritual began with harmonic frequencies that resonated through the crystalline formations in the mountain itself. Steele placed his hands directly on Cronax's primary energy nodes, feeling the alien power coursing through the Guardian's body like liquid lightning. The sensation was overwhelming, like touching a live star. Through the contact, Steele felt Kronax's surprise and then wonder as the human's consciousness merged temporarily with the Guardian's energy matrix. Together, they traced the pathways of crystal decay, identifying the corruption that threatened to tear apart the ancient creature's molecular structure. The transformation. What happened next defied conventional understanding of interspecies biology. Steele's human neural patterns, evolved differently from Nexary consciousness, provided a unique perspective on the Guardian's energy flows. Where Nexary purification focused on restoring traditional patterns, Steele's approach adapted to the Guardian's current state, working with the changes rather than against them. The cleansing process took 14 hours. Steele lost consciousness twice as the Guardian's massive psychic presence overwhelmed his human mind, but each time, Kronax somehow shielded him, sharing his strength to keep the ritual going. By the time the process was complete, both beings were fundamentally changed. Kronax's crystal structure had not just been repaired, it had evolved. New formations had grown along his spine and limbs, creating more efficient energy pathways. His coloration had shifted from pure translucent crystal to include veins of deep blue that pulsed with his heartbeat. Most remarkably, his telepathic range had expanded exponentially. Steele collapsed beside the transformed Guardian, his nervous system barely able to process what they had accomplished together. Through their temporary bond, he had experienced consciousness on a scale that human minds weren't designed to handle, the deep patience of geological time, the harmony of crystalline molecular structures, and the profound loneliness of being one of the last of an ancient species. The return. When Zephyra returned from the negotiations 2 days later, flush with success from preventing a war that could have consumed entire star systems, she found a scene that stopped her cold. Kronax was not just alive and healthy, he was magnificent in a way she had never seen before. His crystal formations caught the light and threw it back in patterns that seemed to sing with their own inner music. But it was the human sleeping peacefully against the Guardian's flank that truly shocked her. Kronax, who had never allowed anyone but her to touch him casually, was actively sheltering Captain Steele with his body. More disturbing still, she could feel through their bond that something fundamental had changed in her Guardian's consciousness. "What did you do?" she whispered, approaching slowly. Kronax's mental touch was different now, deeper, more complex, carrying harmonics that resonated with frequencies she had never felt before. Through their connection, she received a flood of images and sensations, the ritual, the cleansing, the moment when human and Guardian consciousness had merged to save both their lives. But what struck her most powerfully was the realization that this human had performed a ceremony that was supposed to be impossible for any non-Nexary, and had somehow done it better than the traditional methods. The implications were staggering. "You performed the cleansing of inner light," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But that's only possible for bonded partners. Only someone who shares a soul with a Guardian can survive that level of psychic contact." Captain Steele stirred, opening his eyes to meet her gaze. The expression on his face was different now, older somehow, carrying knowledge that no human should possess. "Commander Valdris," he said quietly, "I think it's time we had a conversation about what humans really are, and why we were never supposed to encounter Guardian-bonded species before we were ready." The bioluminescent patterns on Zephyra's skin flickered through a rapid sequence of colors, confusion, fear, anger, and something else she couldn't quite identify. Because deep in her mind, a terrible possibility was beginning to form, that everything she thought she knew about the sacred bond between her people and their Guardians might be wrong. Cultural collision. The confrontation. The tension in Zephyra's home was thick enough to cut with a plasma blade. She stood across from Captain Steele, her bioluminescent markings cycling through angry red patterns while Kronax watched nervously from between them. The Guardian's distress was palpable through their bond, his confusion at the conflict between two beings he had come to care for. "You violated everything," Zephyra said, her voice low and dangerous. "The cleansing of inner light is the most sacred ritual in Nexary culture. It represents the ultimate union between Guardian and bonded. For you to perform it without permission, without understanding. Without understanding? Steele interrupted, rising from where he had been sitting beside Cronax. Commander, I understood exactly what I was doing. Your guardian was dying. The crystal decay would have killed him within days, and you weren't here to perform the traditional ceremonies. Then you should have waited. The words exploded from her with such force that the crystals embedded in the chamber walls resonated sympathetically. Better that he die with honor than be contaminated by alien interference. The moment the words left her mouth, Zephyra regretted them. Cronax's mental anguish hit her like a physical blow, his hurt and confusion at her rejection of the human who had saved his life. But her anger was too strong, too deeply rooted in generations of cultural teaching. The sacred traditions. Do you have any idea what you've done? She continued, pacing around the chamber like a caged predator. The bond between Nexary and Guardian is sacred. It dates back to the earliest days of our civilization, when the first Guardians chose to share their consciousness with our ancestors. That bond is what makes us who we are as a people. Steele listened quietly, his expression unreadable. When she paused for breath, he spoke calmly. And now you think I've somehow corrupted that bond by helping Cronax survive? You don't understand. Zephyra's markings flared brighter. The cleansing of inner light creates a permanent psychic connection. By performing the ritual, you've inserted yourself into a relationship that has been sacred for over 3,000 years. You've made yourself part of our bond. The accusation hung in the air between them. Through her connection with Cronax, Zephyra could feel the truth of it. There was indeed a new thread in the complex web of consciousness that linked her to her guardian. A thread that led directly to the human standing before her. The human perspective. So let me understand this correctly, Steele said, his voice taking on an edge for the first time since she'd known him. You would have preferred that I let Cronax die rather than save his life using knowledge that I legitimately possess? Legitimately? Zephyra laughed bitterly. How can a human legitimately possess knowledge of our most sacred rituals? Did you steal it? Purchase it from some corrupt priest? Or did your species develop advanced espionage techniques we don't know about? Steele's expression hardened. What if I told you that the knowledge wasn't stolen? What if I told you that humans have always carried this understanding, but we've been prevented from accessing it until now? That's impossible. Humans are a young species. You've only had faster-than-light travel for 3 decades. Our guardians have existed for millennia. Have they? Steele asked quietly. Or have you just assumed they belonged exclusively to your people because that's what your histories say? The question hit Zephyra like a cold shock. Through her bond with Cronax, she felt the guardian's sudden attention, his ancient consciousness focusing on the human's words with sharp interest. Challenging assumptions. The first recorded bonding between Nexary and Guardian happened 3,000 years ago, Zephyra said, reciting what every child of her people learned. The Guardians emerged from the deep crystal caves of our homeworld and chose our ancestors as partners in consciousness. Emerged from caves, Steele repeated thoughtfully. Not evolved on your world. Not created by your people. They came from somewhere else and chose to work with the Nexary. Zephyra felt the first crack in her certainty. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe your people weren't the first to encounter Guardians. Maybe you weren't chosen because you were special, but because you were available. The accusation was so shocking that Zephyra's bioluminescent patterns went completely dark, a reaction that only occurred during extreme emotional trauma. You're saying my people's entire cultural identity is based on a lie? I'm saying that maybe your people's cultural identity is based on incomplete information, Steele corrected gently. Look at what just happened, Zephyra. I performed a ritual that should have been impossible for a non-Nexary. But it wasn't just possible, it was necessary. And it worked better than your traditional methods. Through her bond with Cronax, she felt the Guardian's agreement, his satisfaction with the changes the human's ritual had brought to his crystalline structure. The truth was undeniable, Steel's cleansing had not just saved Cronax's life, it had improved him. The deeper questions. Even if that were true, Zephyra said slowly, it doesn't give you the right to interfere with our sacred bonds. The relationship between guardian and bonded is supposed to be exclusive, pure. Pure? Steel's voice carried a note of challenge. Is that what you call it when Cronax was dying and you were more concerned with political negotiations than his survival? The accusation stung because it carried truth. Zephyra had known her guardian was struggling, but the peace talks had seemed more immediately important. The negotiations were crucial. If they had failed, entire star systems would have gone to war. And while you were preventing wars, your bonded partner was preparing to die alone rather than worry you. Steel's voice was calm but relentless. Tell me, Commander, which of us really understands what it means to care for another consciousness? The question hit deeper than any physical blow. Through her bond with Cronax, Zephyra felt the Guardian's complex emotions, love for her, but also gratitude toward the human who had recognized his need and acted to save him. The uncomfortable truth. You don't understand our culture, she said weakly, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. Maybe I understand it better than you think, Steel replied. Maybe I understand that consciousness doesn't recognize species boundaries. Maybe I understand that the capacity to bond with another mind isn't limited to those born on Nexari Prime. He moved closer to Cronax, and the Guardian immediately leaned into his touch, a gesture that would have been impossible just days ago, but now seemed completely natural. Your Guardian doesn't see me as a contamination, Steel said quietly. He sees me as someone who was willing to risk his own consciousness to save a friend. Maybe the question isn't whether I had the right to perform the ritual, but whether your culture's restrictions are actually serving the Guardian's best interests. Zephyra felt her worldview cracking like overstressed crystal. Everything she had been taught about the sacred nature of the Guardian bond, about the special relationship between her people and these ancient beings, was being challenged by the simple fact that a human had succeeded where Nexari traditions had failed. What are you really suggesting? She asked, though part of her already knew the answer would change everything. Steel looked directly into her eyes, and she saw something there that she hadn't noticed before, a depth of understanding that seemed far older than any human should possess. I'm suggesting that maybe it's time for both our species to learn the truth about what Guardians really are, and why they've been waiting so long for the right partners to find them. The implications of his words hung in the chamber like a challenge to everything she had ever believed. And deep in her mind, connected to both her and the human through Cronax's expanded consciousness, she began to sense that the truth might be more wonderful and terrifying than anything her people had ever imagined. The truth revealed. The telepathic intervention. The argument between Zephyra and Captain Steel might have continued indefinitely if not for Cronax's sudden intervention. The Guardian moved between them, his crystalline form blazing with inner light, and released a harmonic pulse that resonated through both their minds with irresistible force. What followed was not communication in any conventional sense, but a direct sharing of consciousness that left both humanoids staggered. Through Cronax's expanded telepathic abilities, enhanced by the cleansing ritual, ancient memories flooded their awareness. Zephyra gasped as images filled her mind, vast crystalline beings drifting through space between the stars, their consciousness spanning light years, seeking worlds where organic life had evolved the capacity for true mental connection. Not just the Nexari homeworld, but dozens of planets, hundreds of species, all touched by the Guardian's search for compatible minds. Impossible, she whispered, but even as she spoke, more memories cascaded through the link. The ancient history. Through Cronax's memories, they witnessed the truth that had been hidden for millennia. The Guardians were not native to any single world, they were explorers, refugees from a dying galaxy who had traveled across vast distances seeking new homes, new partnerships, new forms of consciousness to explore. We were never the only ones, Zephyra said, her voice filled with wonder and terror. The Guardians bonded with other species before us. The memories showed civilizations that had risen and fallen, species that had achieved perfect harmony with the crystalline beings only to destroy themselves through war, environmental collapse, or simple evolutionary divergence. The Guardians had watched their partners die again and again, carrying the memories of lost civilizations within their crystalline matrices. Captain Steele stood perfectly still, his face pale as the alien memories integrated with his human consciousness. "That's why you know the rituals," Zephyra realized. "Your species, we encountered Guardians before, didn't we?" The human connection. Through Kronax's shared memories, the truth about humanity's hidden history emerged like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Thousands of years ago, during humanity's early expansion into space, human explorers had encountered Guardian-bonded civilizations. Not as conquerors or traitors, but as students and partners. "The Prometheus expedition," Steele said quietly, recognizing fragments of suppressed historical records. "They called it humanity's first deep space exploration mission. But it wasn't exploration, it was contact." The memories showed human crews working alongside Guardian-bonded aliens, learning their technologies, their philosophies, their methods of consciousness sharing. For a brief time, it seemed that humanity might become another Guardian-bonded species, adding their unique perspective to the ancient partnership. But something had gone wrong. Political pressures, fear of alien influence, the desire to maintain human independence, whatever the cause, the connections had been severed. The human crews returned to Earth with their memories suppressed, the Guardian technology classified beyond the highest security levels. The suppressed knowledge. "They buried it all," Steele continued, his voice filled with a mixture of anger and sadness as more memories surfaced. "The military-industrial complex decided that humanity needed to develop independently, without alien influence. They suppressed the Guardian knowledge, marked it as dangerous foreign technology." Zephyra felt the weight of parallel deceptions. "My people did something similar, didn't they? We convinced ourselves that we were the Guardians' chosen people, that our bond was unique and sacred." Through Kronax's memories, she saw the truth: the Nexari had not been chosen for their spiritual superiority, but for their pragmatic usefulness. When other Guardian-bonded species had died out or rejected their crystalline partners, the Nexari had been available, willing, and stable enough to maintain the relationship. "We were both lied to," she realized. "Your people were told that Guardian bonding was too dangerous, too alien. My people were told that we were specially chosen, uniquely compatible. Both lies designed to control us." The Guardian's perspective. Kronax's consciousness pressed deeper into both their minds, sharing not just memories but emotions, perspectives, the actual experience of being one of the last Guardians in known space. They felt his loneliness, the weight of carrying the memories of dozens of extinct civilizations, the desperate hope each time he encountered a new species that might be capable of true partnership. But they also felt his joy at the recent developments. The cleansing ritual had not just saved his life, it had awakened dormant capabilities in his crystalline matrix, abilities that had been waiting for exactly this combination of Nexari emotional depth and human innovative thinking. "You're not just partners," Zephyra said, understanding flooding through her. "You're bridges. You connect different types of consciousness, allow them to share experiences and knowledge that would be impossible otherwise." The Guardians' agreement resonated through their linked minds, along with something else: anticipation. Through the ritual, Kronax had sensed something that filled him with hope for the first time in centuries. The combination of human and Nexari consciousness, mediated through Guardian telepathy, had created something new, a form of awareness that transcended individual species' limitations. The wider implications. There are others, Steele realized, processing the knowledge flowing through their connection. Other Guardians, other species, all kept separate by the same kind of political manipulation that split humans from the bonding program. Zephyra nodded, her bioluminescent markings now cycling through colors that had no equivalent in normal Nexari emotional expression. She was experiencing feelings that her species had never evolved to process. The hegemony, the rebel sectors, even my own people's high command, they're all invested in keeping species separate, controllable. Through Kronax, they began to understand the true scope of the deception. Guardian-bonded species were powerful, but more importantly, they were united across traditional species boundaries. A galaxy full of guardian-bonded civilizations would be impossible to control through the usual methods of economic manipulation, military pressure, or political division. They need us to stay isolated, Steele said. Humans with their innovation and adaptability, Nexari with their emotional intelligence and spiritual depth, Guardians with their vast knowledge and telepathic abilities, together, we'd be unstoppable. The choice ahead. The revelation left both of them staggered, but also energized. Through their shared connection with Kronax, they could feel the possibilities opening up before them. Not just personal bonding between the three of them, but the potential for a new kind of interspecies cooperation that could reshape galactic civilization. The question is, Zephyra said slowly, what do we do with this knowledge? Steele's expression was grim but determined. We can try to hide it, pretend this never happened, go back to our separate cultures and maintain the lies that have kept us apart for millennia. Or we accept that everything we thought we knew was wrong, and we start building something better. Kronax's mental voice joined theirs, not in words but in pure emotion, hope, determination, and the deep satisfaction of a guardian who had finally found the partners he had been seeking for so long. But even as they contemplated the possibilities, warning signals began flashing on Zephyra's communication systems. The peace negotiations she had just completed were already breaking down, and hostile forces were moving toward their position. The choice they made in the next few hours wouldn't just affect their personal relationships, it would determine whether the galaxy would continue to be divided by ancient lies, or whether three different forms of consciousness could work together to forge a new future. Through their strengthened bond, all three beings felt the weight of that responsibility, and the knowledge that whatever they decided, there would be no going back to the comfortable certainties they had known before.